I know it's only October, but I've already been drawing and painting several of these little robins recently to turn into special Christmas cards this year. If you want to paint one with me, grab your paints and your paper. Otherwise, grab a cup of tea, sit back and relax as I draw and paint. Okay, so I have my watercolour paper down. I'm using Fabriano Artistico cold press watercolour paper. So I've got my my Faber-Castell pencil and I'm just sketching out the rough outline of the robin. I'm using a soft pencil. This one happens to be a 6B because it was the first one that I picked up. I wouldn't always pick up something so soft, but it works really well to use a nice soft pencil for just sketching out a drawing because it's quite easy to erase and knock back some of the lines afterwards. I'm freehand drawing my robin, but if you don't want to freehand yours, I will put a line drawing over on my website and I'll link that in the description. So if you want a traceable line drawing, I'll put one over there for you. So I'm taking my putty eraser, just dabbing it very gently, running it very gently over the lines to knock back some of those pencil lines so that they don't show through the watercolours quite so much. So I'm taking a clean paintbrush and just wetting it down with some water just so that it's damp, and just running that all over the top of the robin where the orange breast and his orange head would be. And then I'm just putting a little bit of yellow ochre into, I've got a mix of yellow ochre and some vermilion on that palette there. I'm just putting in some yellow into that. It's the palette's already mixed up because I've already been painting quite a few of these robins because I've been painting them for Christmas cards, painting smaller versions. I've made this one a little bit bigger for the video. And I'm just dropping some of that yellow and orange mixture into the wet area. So I'm dropping in a little bit of olive green to turn the orange paint into more of a brown colour, and just dropping a little bit of that in. I just want to take a clean paintbrush. It's a wet paintbrush. I've dipped it in water and then I've just dabbed it off on my towel at the side, and I'm just lifting out some of this colour on the robin's chest to add a few highlights here and there. And then I'm going to take a clean wet paintbrush again and add some water, exactly the same as I did on the orange area. Add some water to come down onto the underside of him. I don't mind if the water touches the orange in areas. I've kept a little bit of a gap, but I don't mind if it touches in areas. This drawing's fairly sketchy and fairly loose, so I don't mind if colours run a little bit. going to wet the whole area. I don't want puddles and puddles of water. I just want a nice damp piece of paper that I can drop some pigment into. This is a little bit of Payne's Grey and a bit of the burnt umber. Very watery mix. I want this to dry really quite light. And underneath I'm just putting a little bit of that olive green and a bit of burnt umber into that I've already got mixed up on my palette, and just putting it into the Payne's Grey and the burnt umber mix I've got on the top. Just to add a little bit more brown and green to the area under the branch. So I'm bringing a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of carmine to create a lavender colour, to just drop down the side of the wing on the chest there. Doesn't matter that I've had a back run into the orange, I don't mind that at all. It will just add to the effect, and I'm going to be putting a bit more orange on top of that anyway. And I'm using a clean wet paintbrush again to just lift out some of this colour, just to create little bits of highlights here and there. So I'm going over to the top of the head and wetting down that area. And using this Payne's Grey and burnt umber mix. And just dropping in a little bit of the olive green and the burnt umber mix. So I've wet all the sections separately, and that way I can control the colours. And I want the colours to run a little bit, but I don't want them all to just become one on the page. So by wetting down the areas separately just means that I've got a little bit more control. And I'm just adding a bit more burnt umber into that mix. And dropping that colour in. I've added a little bit of Indothrene blue into the burnt umber mix and then just mixed it with that lavender colour that I'd mixed earlier, just to drop along the side of this wing and along the side of this branch. And I'm coming down to wet the tail area, and again mixing a little bit of that blue and lavender mix together and just dropping it into this tail. So I'm going over the orange area again with a little bit more water to re-wet the area, and then I'm just dropping a bit of the vermilion into the orange mix that I'd already got down on my palette, just to darken that down a little bit. The area wasn't quite as wet as I thought it was, so I'm just encouraging that to move with a bit of clean water. Just adding a bit of burnt umber into this blue mix on the palette and just dropping that into the robin's head. Just dropping a little bit of this lavender mix into this area as well. And using that to help soften the edge of the burnt umber that I've just put down. I want to create some fine feathers on the bottom or on the top of that tail. So I've just pressed my brush down. It's just a clean wet paintbrush. Pressed it down on the towel to create a nice fine edge, and then use that to feather out some of the tail feathers. And this orange area is still quite damp, so I'm just dropping in a little bit more of this deeper orange. And then dragging out a few highlights again with the paintbrush is damp, but I will keep drying it off on a tissue to clean it off and pulling out some of those highlights. I've just dabbed out the top of that wing. I realised that I'd put the orange into an area that I actually wanted brown because it's the top of the wing. So I just added a little bit of water and dabbed that out. Just using some Payne's Grey. I've got a Payne's Grey mix that is Payne's Grey with a bit of burnt umber in it, and I'm just using that to bring in some darker areas in these tail feathers. And then I'm just softening that out with some clean water. I'm working on dry paper here. Just adding a glaze of this Payne's Grey and burnt umber mix, which is more Payne's Grey. You can see it's more blue than brown. It's more Payne's Grey than burnt umber. Just adding a bit of a glaze onto these tail feathers. This time I've added a little bit more burnt umber to the mix to bring in a bit more brown. So I'm working with a very watery paint mix on dry paper here. I'm going in with my Payne's Grey and burnt umber mix again to add a bit of definition in the beak. And I'm painting the beak onto dry paper. I've dropped a little bit of cobalt blue into the Payne's Grey mix that I had and just dropped a little bit of that into the eye, and I'll wait for that to dry now before I go back and put detail in. So whilst I'm waiting for the bird to dry, I'm just going to add a little bit of colour to the branch. So I'm going in with a bit of olive green, again just dropping it into an area that I've already wet down with clean water. So I have a bit of burnt umber mixed with the olive green and just dropping that into the branch. Just dropping a little bit of cobalt blue into this lavender mix and just dropping that into the side of his wing. And then softening that out with some clean water again on my paintbrush. I'm going to use some of that orange mix to just close that gap up. I'd left the gap earlier so that the colours didn't run into each other too much, and I'm just closing that up now. So I'm darting down under this wing with the burnt umber and Payne's grey mix. I'm using some of that burnt umber and Payne's grey mix again to add a little bit of definition to these tail feathers. I'm adding a little bit of the permanent Madder Lake and the French ultramarine into the yellow ochre mix to create a nice dark muted pink colour for his legs. And I'm putting that down onto dry paper, leaving it for a second or so, and then taking a clean wet paintbrush and lifting out most of the colour to leave a tint on the paper. Whilst I wait for all that to dry, I'm going to work on the branch. So I'm wetting that down with a clean wet paintbrush again, paying attention to keep the paint away from those claws and those legs that I've just put in. And dropping some of this olive green that's been mixed with what's on my palette. I've already got some Payne's grey and some burnt umber into that area. So just dropping a little bit of olive green into that and putting it down onto this branch. I'm coming in with my size 0 paintbrush and I'm using a little bit of black. I'm just adding the tiniest bit of water to my brush to loosen the paint up so that I can get it to flow around the eye, but I'm keeping it really thick. And I'm just taking a dry tissue to blend that highlight in that eye, the area that I left, blending some of the colour into that and also dabbing off a bit more of the colour at the same time. I'm using my size 0 brush and I've dropped a little bit of French ultramarine into the lavender pink mix that's on the palette. I'm just using my size 0 brush, adding a little bit into the beak onto dry paper and then smoothing it out with a damp paintbrush. I decided that the eye looked a little bit heavy for what I wanted, so I added a spot of clean water and just dabbed out some of the eye, the top part of the eye, with a clean tissue. I'll let that dry and then I will go back in and add some detail into the eye again. So in the meantime, I'm adding a bit more orange to the robin's head and down onto his chest. And just encouraging that orange paint to work its way down with a little bit of clean water, just touching the edges with some clean water and letting it work down. I'm just checking that the branch is dry, and it is, so I can go in with, I've added some burnt sienna into the green mix that I'd already had and just started to put a bit of that into the branch to create some texture. So I'm going back in with the black now that the eye area has dried. Using the black straight out of the pan again, using a very small amount of water just to get the paint flowing from the set, not diluting it too much, and just adding a bit of detail into the eye. Darkening down under that beak with some paint grey. I'm using my burnt umber with a bit of paint grey mix to come into the underside of this wing, and I'm working wet on dry, so the paper's dry and my paintbrush is wet. It's not flooded with water, it's just got enough water on to make the paint flow. I'm darkening down the area behind the robin's legs and feet and the branch that's coming up in front of the robin. I want a nice contrast there so that I can push the branch behind the robin and the other branch and his legs will come forward. So I'm mixing some of the permanent madder lake and the French ultramarine again, just to create a nice deep purple to add some detail onto these legs and claws. want to darken down the area under the claws and around the feet. To push those branches behind the legs and feet of the robin. I'm coming in with a very, very light, watery mix of the Payne's Grey with a little bit of burnt umber in there to add a few feather details. Using my size 0 brush, they will dry lighter so they won't look as dark as they look now. Just a little bit of feather detail here and there. So once I've dipped the paintbrush into the water, I just dab it off on the towel to just take off any excess water to make the lines finer for me. Otherwise, the first time that I touch the paintbrush on the page, the water would just all fall out of it and I'd be left with quite a puddle. And I'm going to do the same with the orange mix on the robin's breast. Just add a few bits of feather definition. And I'm just going back and adding a few final dark bits with this burnt umber mix that's got some Payne's Grey in it to darken it down. Just darken down that branch to push it back. Just going back into that purple mix to add a final bit of detail on the claws and feet and leg. And I want to make sure that the underside of this tail is also quite dark. So just going back into that Payne's grey mixture to add an extra little bit on the underside of these tail feathers. So I'm just using a little bit of opaque white watercolour to add a little bit of detail to the feet. And then I'm just darkening down either side of that branch, making that a little bit darker and making that branch come forward. Using a little bit of the opaque white again to add a bit of detail on the branch. And there we have it. There's my finished robin. So if you've been drawing and painting in with me, I really hope that you've enjoyed joining in. If you have been watching the process from start to finish with a cup of tea, I hope you've enjoyed that and enjoyed the relaxing music too. So if you have enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button. That's really helpful and really supports my channel. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, please do that before you leave. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye for now.